Recording is on.
Alrighty, let's start with excuse me, with updates. Brian C, anything?
Um, I mean, the past week was really kind of going through and checking about dockyards, um, uh, whether qualified for this grant. I know we discussed it off channel, so not sure if we don't want to discuss it too much during the stand up and decide not to, I can edit it out of the video. But the everything seems to be fine for us. I spoke with the Hans from the other project, and just to validate that our proposed usage of the grant funds would be acceptable, but to the, is it H 2020 or HS 2020 Horizon 2020 project, and then really checking in on dockyards side as far as how taxes and the R&D tax credits that dockyard applies for would be affected. So nothing really affecting the project directly, just more kind of like operational type of stuff, but that's it for me.
I would be interested how many times we can qualify for the grant, since like those Horizon things are like the decadal things for science in the EU. Like the EU does similar things for NASA, but I'm just wondering like if it really is once per decade, that seems too limited. So I'm just wondering if there's a renewal process after the year or 2 years, whatever it is for the first grant.
Well, I won't get into it too much, but this grant application has sparked conversation with the dockyard management on hiring a technical grant writer to go out and try to find other grants to apply to.
We're going to have an academic department for R&D soon.
Yeah, well, I guess Twig is only like 30 or 40 people, and they have someone that does it full time, and they are able to, I mean, because they do, I guess, a decent amount of R&D work, and they're able to successfully acquire a certain amount of grant funds per year. And so, I mean, as Dockyard continues to grow and mature, they're looking for, I mean, this is just part of the process, I guess, finding new ways to kind of pay down R&D costs.
Well, I don't know if you remember, but like a lot of the money for Cowboy 2 was actually from a European grant also. Like Europe is way better about sponsoring open source. Like,
did they know about the name being a racist of racist origins?
Oh,
the
Cowboy.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah,
probably not.
But I know I think that one was maybe from France, not from all of EU. But yeah, the EU in general has a lot of grant stuff because the like functional programming conferences that happen like Poland, a lot of the speakers mention grants they're getting. And obviously like Europe's way more interested in functional programming. So I think it is a vehicle. I don't know if it's enough to support someone applying for grants or not though.
Yeah. I can pass that along on Dockyard's side.
I mean, I would imagine that there's similar opportunities in the U.S. as well, but not really familiar.
Mozilla Foundation, maybe. I don't know if we can get money from Apache if we're not an Apache project.
There's Mozilla Foundation. So according to Mozilla's grant website, there needs to be benefit that Mozilla is seeing from the project. So like there are some open source efforts that they fund that they're not like directly using, but it seems like it's most likely that Mozilla will only grant funds to projects that Mozilla is making use of or benefits Mozilla in some way, which I understand. There's grants.gov, which all the different departments of government in the United States will post their grant applications for, but I mean, these are all over the place. I went through that and pulled out maybe 10 that were loosely applied to software development. And once I started digging into them, none of them were applicable. There are independent grants. There's definitely universities that have their own grants. But again, I think if someone at Dockyard, if this was their full-time job, they probably are much more capable than me of going out and finding the ones that match what Dockyard does.
So I can look into it a little bit, but Norway I think is really good at funding these kinds of projects. So I can at least see if there's anything here.
Okay.
I don't know how applicable it would be for us, but I can look at least.
For Mozilla, we might be able to get it indirectly, and I don't know if they would sponsor us for that reason, because we're pushing, the edge of what Rust can do right now and what Rust WASM can do. Like how we're redoing everything for alloc-ref. And so we're we're an actual use case that is not Rust, that is using the cutting edge Rust stuff. So like we're useful in that way to make sure they're not making the wrong decisions, that everyone can use them correctly.
Yeah, there's probably a case to be made, but I'd rather it not be me having to go around chasing the grants. So I'll wait to see what management decides to do on it.
Hans, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Me and I think Paul as well got a mail from Francesco about like a Lumen talk at Codebeam Virtual EU. And I said, yeah, I can do it. And my thought being that if we have anything to show up with Lumen, then we can talk about that. Or if not, then I'll just talk about do it as a sort of update talk from my last EIR talk. So it's really up to what we decide. Yeah,
there's been quite a bit of change there. So definitely would be enough content for a talk on just that topic alone. I think, in the near term, any talks we do focusing a little bit more on that technical detail might be interesting, but I guess I'm not 100% sure how, interesting that is to an Elixir-based audience to some degree, but I don't know. There's a fair number of people that play around with Rust and stuff too. So
the main question is that do we actually have anything worth showing off in Lumen? Do we have enough content for another talk, or should we just wait until we have full?
We don't have any new demos, so we'd have to make a new demo if we want it to be different. All we have is
what was the last thing that we showed? I think that was your talk this spring.
We showed the 2 demos that are currently tests for the Lumen crate, so there's nothing new in there.
New stuff there is exception handling and pretty shortly here the receives.
Right, we would have to write the Erlang code for the exception handling and show it.
I already have that written. I run my tests against an Erlang module.
Oh, okay. Well, you just need to check in. We could show that then.
And by the time when is that happening again, Hans? I forget the date already.
I 25th, right? I think, end of the month.
Yeah. So by then I'll have all the rest of the little bits that I've left hanging wrapped up. So that's all the process sends and receives and supervision, and the binary pieces that we're missing. This past week, I'm just going to go, my past week, I wrapped up the parts I had left untested on the exception handling front. So that's all working the way I expected it to, which is nice. And then we started working on implementing the missing pieces of the binary pattern matching and construction that I had been waiting for Hans' work to do. So I'm expecting to have that stuff done either by next week, our stand-up next week, or sometime midweek. But that would pretty much round out the pieces that we've been waiting on now for the past, month or so to get wrapped up.
So what's the state on, so can I just grab the compiler and compile something that does not involve binary pattern matching and expect it to work in terms of simple examples?
I need to push my changes, but yeah, essentially you can grab the compiler now, and with a module that has code that we have support for syntactically, you can write simple programs. There's not a whole lot available, at least until Luke's changes to support the runtime are done. But I think he was pretty close on that. I'm sure he'll tell us here in a second. But with that in place, then we can write far more interesting programs. It still depends to a large degree on support for the process messaging and supervision to do anything really interesting, but you can still write small programs that now with these changes include exceptions. And you could construct constant binaries before you just couldn't construct binaries dynamically. So
we could write stuff that is just using Erlang strings, like the linked list style, right? As a workaround for now?
yeah, to construct strings, you mean?
Yeah, we could just do
Yeah.
Erlang style. Okay. So that probably works. I don't know if we could compile the OTP gen server if it tries to use binaries or not, but
Pretty much all the standard library code uses binaries to some degree, I think. But
I mean, like the extent of binary, you should be just like push a
fairly
binary
limited.
on a binary, stuff like that. I don't think it's very sophisticated.
Yeah, and the parts that are left unimplemented, until the changes in EIR were done, were relatively minor. I ended up not doing any of the binary construction, knowing that it was going to change. But the pattern matching is there. Not all of the type specifiers and stuff have been supported, but like 99.9% of what most binary pattern matching is just bytes, right? So it's not really a problem for the most part. But the construction piece, I already had code written for, but I didn't commit it because I wasn't sure how things were going to shake out. And so what I'm working on now is just porting that to the new constructs that you built. I have most of the support of that implemented now, so it's really just getting the lowerings in place. And with that done, binaries are effectively supported for most uses, and that's just a matter of fleshing that out with the lowerings for the different type specifiers. And I already have all the support infrastructure for receives built out, and I'm in the same position there. I just need to lower those, and I have the lowerings written for that. I just haven't tested them yet. So it's possible that with the code I have in place, that's already done. I just need to spend some time actually testing some code. And I have an Erlang module written that combines some of the process messaging stuff with exception handling to get kind of like a nice thorough test there. One thing that's pretty nice is that with the changes I made to support the exception handling stuff, the process exiting stuff actually works the way I would expect it to, although I think I'm getting messages printed for process exits that are okay, and I think that's just because our code for whether or not an exception should be, or an exit message should be reported, doesn't handle that atom.
the ones right now are normal, shutdown, and like a shutdown tuple where it's shutdown and then whatever, because those are the ones that were in OTP that seem to be don't print these.
Yeah, I was not sure if processes that you spawn exit and return like okay as an atom actually print that, but I haven't actually double checked to see if that's the case.
Well, technically no. I mean, like technically, unless you turn on the SASL, none of that stuff's supposed to print. I just have it printing.
Right.
Is it not an expected with the normal shutdown or shutdown whatever, like the gen server, like normal ones. But okay, ours would, but not the real one without SASL turned on.
Gotcha. So yeah, I probably just need to tweak the atom that's being returned to be something other than okay. Well, I think the reason it's returning okay is it's actually the return value of the top level function. So that's what's going on there. But the nice thing about that is that it shows that that infrastructure is working all put together. So I think layering the receives on top of that, things should more or less behave the way we expect. So that would be supervision, process messages, exceptions, all that wrapped up, leaving just the binary pieces that are undone at this point. I also have to actually implement the lowerings for the maps APIs, but that's pretty much just lowering to a function call to the runtime. I'm not doing anything code generation wise that actually manipulates maps because we don't have our own data structure for that. And that's it. That's all we would have to support the language. Then it's runtime functionality purely. So I would expect 2 weeks to wrap that stuff up, somewhere in that ballpark. So if the conference is coming up before then, I think we could probably have a pretty thorough set of features to demonstrate, like, hey, you can actually compile like an Erlang program without the standard library and stuff, but it has all the functionality you need to build one from scratch if you had to.
So what kind of prep do you guys think you need before the next robust conference presentation?
Depends on how we want to present things, I suppose.
Depends how much of my slides Hans wants to reuse, because otherwise he needs time to do slides from scratch.
So like we probably like go for like a Lumen presentation if we find that things are sufficiently ready, and then if not, then I'll just throw some together with EIR. Hopefully, like it would be really fun to show Lumen stuff, but like just like so we have two options.
You'll definitely be able to show some stuff. The question will definitely be whether or not we've finished out those last few details to really be able to say, hey, the compiler has this version ready without virtually any of the standard library support available, but here's a quick demonstration of all the features.
So like other than the upcoming like Codebeam Virtual, is there any, no, not Codebeam, ElixirConf Virtual, what's the next conference after that? Do you know?
Japan hasn't announced. ElixirConf US hasn't announced.
I'll pull it up. I saw on Reddit yesterday, there's actually a large list of online software conferences. I know that we're more aware of the Elixir related ones, but there may be some functional programming ones that could apply. I'll find that Reddit link and post it in the channel.
Also, functional programming conferences are usually so academic that we have a much better chance of being impressive with like the compiler that works than like someone sitting in their editor and just showing that like it helps them. So they're much more forgiving that we're not as done. Like I feel bad about going to a normal software engineering conference with where Lumen is right now, because they won't understand how hard it was, and so like they'll just think this is silly.
I mean, yeah, you either need the context of understanding what the beam is and how it's implemented, or just have some context for understanding how much work goes into a compiler. But it's definitely something that, unless it's flashy and fun to play with, a lot of people just simply don't care. So
I think like we would want to probably like the next major conference we're going to, we'd probably want to aim that at having a sort of launch, maybe.
Yes.
like having something that people can download and try out and stuff, and then after that we can sort of more go gradually, because then we have something to show off, like people can use and stuff, or download and try out.
Yeah, I agree.
I really feel like if we like we're this close now, so I don't feel it's any good idea to just keep showing off like small things if we're this close. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if we wanted to, we could put together I mean, like one of these mother of all demo type like things where it's showing off different potential use cases and applications of Lumen. And if that were to be the case, it may be, and if the native side of it is stable and the WebAssembly side of it is stable, it may be good to kind of do both of those as well. It'd be like kind of a showcase of things as opposed to, and that would probably encapsulate within a 40-minute talk on like use cases of Lumen, which would be separate than a like deep dive into how Lumen works.
Yeah.
Luke, we didn't get an update from you. You want to go?
So I've been pointing this to the Lumen Slack channel, but the DOM part, the like printing to the DOM table, was having issues in spawn chain, and it looked at first that it was a resource reference thing, and it wasn't. What turns out is that there was one bug with heap bins, like one of the layout calculations didn't extend to mid align, so like when it first made a heap fragment, it made it for like the non-min aligned version, so it was 4 bytes off in certain cases. And so I fixed that, and then I was still getting it weirdly, and I started to print out. I was dumping the thing, and I was seeing a bunch of nuns in there, and I thought there was a weird collection thing. But what turned out to be is that the calculation for the arity of a closure is wrong. So it was only including the end size, but of course the closure is more than just the header. It is a bunch of stuff like what's the like module and function name for it, and so like that size is miscalculated. So I fixed that in 2 places, but now there must be something that uses the arity to calculate how big the env array is, because now when it prints out that the env is like 22 bytes long and prints a bunch of none. So like there's something else I have to find where the env arity, the env length and the arity is not being calculated correctly still. And
which type is that for?
The closure type. So I think what happened is when you did the like the cool thing with like the type header thing and the dynamic header, you use the env length as like that's the arity of a closure, but you missed, I think, that I had specialized closure, and so like it wasn't as simple as just use the env length. And so I'm just going through to figure out what needs to be changed to make that work. Right now it was just 2 places that made the set the header arity right, but now it's when I debug print a closure, it thinks instead of the end being empty, it's a bunch of things. So it's like assuming that the entire arity is the end blank somehow when debug printing it, and I have to figure out why that is. Because
there might be a bug with the debug printing. I can't recall if I actually went through and checked the implementation of that.
Yeah, so I have to confirm that whether it's a debug printing issue or like it's actually reading the env out wrong, or not.
Yeah, I mean the closure definition and layout and everything is based on the way closures in the generated code are laid out. But presumably there shouldn't be any difference with closures that are constructed in Rust, but it might be something in the API that allows one to construct a closure with a slightly different structure or layout. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I haven't really tested, I guess, the Rust closure like APIs that I can think of. Well, no, is that true though? No, it's not. I know that it's not true because I think I built closures. I have a test that does the dynamic apply stuff. So, but obviously there's quite a bit that hasn't been like thoroughly tested there. So there's definitely a possibility there that there's either a bug based on like the size of the env or something like that. But if you
Well, does it
If
make
you
sense?
can show me how you're constructing the closure, I might be able to compare against how I would be expecting it to be constructed.
Yeah, it could have been that merging the two branches I added back in code that shouldn't have been added back in. Maybe, I don't know.
You could
I'll
do
have
a
to double
diff
check.
against the compiler branch and see what is
Well,
different about that closure
we merged
module.
your stuff in to develop. So if I go back against develop, I'll double check. If I merge back in fields, that means that the version that I needed is incompatible with the one. But it seems the way you had it, you have all the stuff for calculating the layout offsets still, right?
Yeah,
Like, okay, so I think I didn't merge in something that shouldn't be there. It was maybe
it would
just
only be an issue maybe if there's like a three-way merge issue where like it kept parts of old and new mixed together.
well, it
And
could have been because remember I merged your branch into develop, but I was also following your branch. So then there was a rebase in there, so it could have like the dates got messed
yeah,
up, and it just assumed it was newer. Um, but yeah,
that closure layout type, reviewing the 4M implementation is probably the one
so
you'd want to look closely
the
at.
layout, the layout type makes sense to me. The problem was that it didn't. The layout obviously has a large size, but we instead of using that layout and using two word size to calculate the header arity, we were just saying that the end blank was the arity. Like it was almost like the closure was a tuple, which is
Yeah, I mean
not
that
because there's extra
what's
space.
actually written to the arity value of the closure term is the length of the environment because the closure struct itself is a fixed size. Well,
Wait,
technically it's dynamically sized, but
no, but the logic for like the debug printer, and I thought the logic in general was always that the arity is how many words wide this thing is.
that does not work for dynamically sized types like tuples and closures.
Right, but on the tuple it is it's the arity written into the header of a tuple is like how many extra terms are. So it's like how many words past the tuple to read. Is that not the case anymore? Because right now,
No.
okay, because the logic in the printers is ask for the arity of the term, which is like how many words, how many terms to skip ahead for the printer. That's not the
Right.
case with the
I
closure
mean, we
anymore?
probably need to double check, but so dynamically sized types, specifically closure, tuple. I don't believe there are others.
Heap-bin is laid out.
Oh, right. Yep, that one is as well. Each of those, they implement a dynamic header type, and the calculations that it does are all based on the values in the header. So our like printing logic and other things that care about the size of something should not be calculating that size. They should be asking the header for its size, for the size of the value, because that's how you get the correct calculations.
So the
and
terms,
it's possible that those the printing implementations, because they predate all that, might still be doing some calculations themselves.
but is it still considered that the arity is how many terms a term actually takes up? Is that still true even with the new headers?
No, it's not.
Okay,
I mean,
so,
it is true for statically sized types, but not dynamically sized types. And that's just more of a coincidence than it is like a necessity. It's fair to assume that the arity is not something you can rely on to be the same semantics for every type. It depends on the type.
Okay, so we broke with that from because like the beam does that where the arity is like how many terms wide the term actually is, and we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah, we started there, but because we're doing this in Rust, in order to deal with the dynamically sized types, namely to be able to use the env and so on like actual slices, I deviated with the implementation for those. So this meshes better with Rust, but differs in what's actually used or what's present in the arity value of the header.
Well, unfortunately, it means that maybe I just found a printer bug then, but that doesn't. I mean, it could be that there's another thing calling arity incorrectly then, and that's what's causing this bug. But it's not just that it doesn't print the stack. It's that the reference gets overwritten somehow, and then the reference count goes super high. So something is overwriting the resource reference, and there is a heap bin right before it. So I thought that might be the case, that there was a miscalculation somewhere.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's possible that the construction of that heap bin is incorrect somehow, and so it's actually occupying more space than expected.
Yeah,
That shouldn't be possible, but there might be some old code that still, is operating on the way the heap bin used to be constructed.
Yeah, it could be that there is another spot where, like, when I fixed the min alignment, when the layout wasn't padded to min alignment to get the heap fragment the right size, that it ended up going too big somewhere else, and that's what's overriding the resource. So, like, I triggered this bug by fixing the previous bug, maybe. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll have to look if Heapin has another layout thing where it needs to also be min align padded. Because the problem is that the layout thinks it's 32-bit aligned, but since we always min align pad to 64 bits, even on WASM 32, like that was like the first part of the heap fragment not being the right size. Like, it would think it could fit it, and then you'd actually put it in, but the alloc layout would min align, and like the how big should I make the heap fragment in the first place didn't. And so now I min align that.
Interesting.
But there might be another place where now it thinks the heap fragment, the heap bin is smaller. And so it's like, oh, I can put the resource right here, and it's actually writing it to the tail end of the bytes of the heap bin or something like that.
I don't think we should have probably any code that's like all the constructors for things like heap bins should be correctly constructing the size of the type. But if we're doing anything manual that, like, say, writes directly to the memory backing the heap bin, or when it's being moved by the GC, if we're doing anything wrong there, I mean, the GC should be accounting for heap bins and everything correctly, because that was written after I made those changes. But that's another area where it's possible for that. I know I ran into a couple bugs that, when I was doing the implementation, where the size of values following, or like, so for something following a dynamically sized type, it could get overwritten because the size calculations were off somewhere. I thought I'd pretty much gotten rid of all of those, but it's sounds like there might be another one like that. But without knowing where the cause is, like, is it happening during construction of the binary? Is it happening during GC? It's hard to say where that bug would be, but it's pretty limited in where it could happen.
It might be after the semi-space flip, because after that, when I printed out the young heap, there was a none, like, right at the beginning of it. Like, maybe it's an off by one error somehow. And, like, there should be no, like, a none, which is just all zeros in our system.
Yeah.
It was, like, somehow at the start of the heap. So, like, the heap was off by one or something. It was weird.
It's weird that it shows, like, prints none. I mean, the whole heap should be none, an empty one anyways. You're saying the old heap had a none written to it?
No, so I know it was the old heap and a switch happened, because before that I had it printed, and, like, the address that the young heap is at was the previous old heap address. So did the semi-space flip.
Right, yeah.
But then the very beginning of the printing, the first address, the first term was all zeros, and then an actual thing happened. So it's that, or that, I don't know, if after you do the flip, do you re-zero out the old one, or is garbage there? Maybe that's all I was seeing.
I don't do anything with the old heap from what I recall. You'd have to double check, but
Okay, so maybe
when the flip happens and we have copied everything, yeah, I don't think we're zeroing out.
okay, so maybe it's just because it's the old heap and it's switched around that it's supposed to look like that, and I'm just confused by it not being zeroed out.
Yeah, I mean, I would continue to operate skeptically and verify these things just in case. So if it's only happening after a GC, is that the case? From what you've observed?
Yes, assuming that the thing I saw is with the closure is just a printing error, then yes, it only happens after GC. Because before I start doing all this printing stuff, what would happen is for an n of 1, so like it only spells one child process and immediately pops back, it works. But when you do 2, it doesn't print. And if you go a higher number, sometimes it works longer, sometimes it doesn't. So like there's some like inconsistent term overriding where like it just makes the thing fail. And under test, what happens is the test just doesn't happen. So like it completely dies. And in the actual console, it says like runtime error, like memory access out of bounds, which is where I thought, which is how the like, and it was trying to, and this happens when trying to access the document. So at first I'm like, is the document getting collected or something? Because it doesn't show what memory I'm trying to read, and so I just assumed like, oh, it must be document related. And so I went through all this trouble of like, well, maybe it's getting collected. So I tried to arc them, and that didn't help. And so now I think it's more that the actual bits are getting overwritten or something weird, because the reference count goes from very well behaved of like at most having like 13 for the reference count, and then it slowly goes down to like having 2.7 million, which is obviously it writing some other term's data in there or something.
Right.
Because it's not overflow, subtraction or add wise.
Right.
On the U size.
Yeah. If it's happening during GC, then I'm trying to remember if actually in the sweep implementation that I had tests for this stuff, but do I have one for closure in here? Oh, interesting. Okay. That might be, oh wait, there it is. Yeah, I mean, except for, well, it's something maybe we should look into, or at least verify is doing what we're expecting it to do. So in the sweep, the GC sweep implementation for that just raw term pointer, it dispatches based on whether, oh, he's gone.
Let me see if he's still on Slack or if he's dropped off of everything. Yeah, he's not on Slack either. I'm gonna guess.
I guess he just lost his internet.
Yeah.
Oh, that's all right. Trying to think if there's anything else we really needed to.
Brian, what's the plan for content to add to the website? I mean, is there value?
So
like
we have
YouTube videos?
All right, so that became a little bit more complex in light of all the pandemic stuff. But remember the original conversation was that there was a couple things. So number one, we moved off of Getify, Getlify, whatever it is, onto GitHub Pages. That is complete. If you go to getlumen.org, it shows the template GitHub Pages repo. That's there. Second was I was going to reach out to someone that has been writing about Lumen already, Lars, and see about getting him involved with the website and some blog articles. That was under a different state of Dockyard at the time, where there was marketing budget. And like within a week of that, me bringing that up to Lars, is when all this stuff started happening, and the whole kind of budgeting outlook of everything just completely blew up. And so I had discussed it with management. They were fine with it. And then like the next day, it was like, okay, we have to pull back on this offer. And so I went back to Lars and kind of, let him, I let him know the news. And I think that I presented it as a complete package. So I may want to go back to him and just chat with him about the getlumen.org website, and see if he's willing to contribute some time on that, or if we can find someone else to do it. I'm currently on a internal building a product at Dockyard that's going to be spun out into its own entity very soon, and so I'm pulling between 10 to 12 hour days right now. I don't have the bandwidth to do it.
I know that one of us is going to get to it. It's just mostly been all of us more or less swamped. So
what do we want to write about in the beginning?
I think initially we just want to put up like a list of all the posts and talks and things like that that are out there. Basically information about the project and where people can go to learn more. And then near future we'll do a download page and how to get everything built.
Yeah, I would just make the main page be a news feed for now, and not be like a this is how you Lumen, because we're not ready for that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then if it looks like we hit the milestone I was talking about here before the conference that Francesco reached out to us about, we can update that page with like here's, if you want to experiment with this, here's where you can download the last version of the compiler that supports these features, and let people actually be able to fetch it that way rather than having to build it themselves. But yeah, nothing really super critical or important needs to be there. I think for now, just providing some quick introductory text and then links to the various talks and stuff would be enough.
Fran, who do we get stuff to? Like, I may have some time this week that I could go and grab some of the links to previous conference presentations and so forth, send them to you.
It may make sense. So there is a getlumen.org project in the Lumen organization. And it may make sense just to have an open issue where these links, conference talk, URLs, blog post links, etc., are being dumped, just so we have a single place for them. I can start that issue right now, and then I will post. Excuse me. I'll post the link in the channel, and then we can kind of take it from there.
Awesome.
If I write anything about EIR, like on the technical side, it would be fine to like post it both on the Lumen blog and on my personal one, right? That shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah,
just posting across, because
I think we should do that as a general rule. Anything that is relevant to the project that would be relevant to people interested in the project and what's happening with it. I think cross-posting those things is fine. It doesn't have to be something that's like only been made by us or posted on the Lumen site itself.
Yeah.
You know.
It's not like
Yeah.
I don't even want to like market my own blog. Like marketing the other one is like perfectly fine. It's just that I would like to keep like a repository of things I write on my blog as well.
I think
Yeah,
also if we're posting other people's stuff, it really kind of creates more incentive for people to write stuff. If it's just like the Lumen core team that stuff is getting up there, you know, people maybe feel a little bit discouraged. But if if people write right now, if someone writes a Lumen post, it's very likely it's going to be added to the list, unless it's like an F Lumen post. We may even put that up.
Add it to the list.
Yeah, add it to the list. But it's I think adding, just making sure that people are aware that we're keeping an eye on things and that any contributions, no matter what form they're coming in, are being recognized.
Sounds
Yeah,
good.
definitely. I think get people more interested in contributing if they see that they're getting some exposure by writing about it. You know, helps. So I don't think we really have anything left. Luke, with the GC issue, I was going to say that in that sweep implementation, it dispatches based on the dynamically sized types. We probably want to verify that the sizes being calculated there are correct.
Yeah, since I changed the heap bin layout in one place, it could be that place isn't also updated.
Yeah, could you send me a link to like in Git once you push that change so I can look at the changes you made to the layout?
Sure.
Because I'll probably need to make sure that I account for that. But I'll be around. I may not be super responsive because during the day I'm pretty busy, but as soon as I get a chance to look at any questions or comments you post in the channel, I'll take a look. But we can try and get to the bottom of whatever's causing things to get funky there. I pushed the small patch I had locally that like finalizes the exception handling works that I had in progress. So if you build just on the compiler branch and run, well, shit, I guess I haven't committed that file yet, but I have a little Erlang module that just like calls a function that does like case catch, and inside one of the clauses, it has a try catch and an after. And I've been just using that to sort of test all the different exception handling stuff. So you can either craft one yourself, or if you want to play around with it, I can send you mine. But point being that that those are what the changes necessary to at least have all the exception handling stuff wrapped. And then the rest of the work in progress stuff I have, I'll get committed as soon as I've tested them. So.
Is for fixing the printer, is there anything like arity on term, or do I have to figure out the type of the term with like type term and then figure out how to calculate how wide the term is?
So I just want to double check, make sure I'm giving you not bullshit information. So there's the two header types, right? But they're sort of unified under just the header T type, the generic type. And then based on whether it's a sized or unsized type, the API it provides is either like static size or static arity, or size and arity. And it depends on what type T is. So if you're looking at just a raw term, you don't have access to that API. But if you figure out what type it is, you can use those header functions to get the correct size, the same size that's used to actually calculate the layout of the object itself.
Okay, so I'll have to I'll have to turn there won't be like just a dot arity on the term. I'll have to figure out the type again to use the header options. Okay.
Yeah, I would basically recommend trying to access things through that header API only, just because the calculations there are what are used in actually constructing the layout for those objects, but it's also gone through a lot more vetting. So I know that the calculations there are correct for each of the types, but I know that there's a handful of places where we don't call those APIs. We sort of do the calculation again somewhere because we either don't want to reconstruct the type or something along those lines. But if you look at the GC, it actually does that. It figures out what type it's dealing with and then actually asks for the size based on the header. So, but the one place that I had pointed out that I mentioned in that the sweep implementation for just a raw term pointer, it checks what type of thing the term is, and then constructs the reference. So like heap bin and closure, they're essentially like fat pointers, right? Like extremely fat pointers because they have a bunch of metadata, but the point remains that they're like sort of like a slice. So what we're doing is constructing that reference in Rust from that raw term, and then using the size of val function to get the size of the dynamically sized type in bytes. That should be correct, but that's one area I know that where we're saying, give me the size of this thing, and it's not calling through the header API, but it could be easily trivially changed to do so if we needed to. So that's maybe one place I would check to make sure that the sizes there are actually the same, or if they differ, that size of val is not larger than the one that we think based on the header.
Well, the size of val won't apply min-align, right?
Correct. It's the size of the value.
Okay,
itself.
so that could maybe explain the little off by problem then. Is that?
But we're like in that sweep implementation there, we're saying, give me the size of this value, just like the value itself. And then we round that up to the word size, and then we min-align that. So that size, that final or total size, will always be bigger than the value itself, or never less.
Okay, so as long as it's rounded again by min-align, it's fine.
But the copy that we do is based on that size that we get from size of val. So if the pointer, no, that shouldn't be, it's not a problem. So I think the issue is that if size of val is larger than what the header would think it is, then the layout on the heap would not match that. So it's going to copy more data than it should and potentially overwrite something. Yeah, I think I'm thinking through that correctly. Without stepping through the code, it's kind of tough to hold all that in one's head, but that's where I would look first. To me, based on what you've described, that seems the most likely place for this to get triggered is when the actual sweep is happening, terms are being moved around. If any of those calculations are inaccurate, it would be pretty easy to stomp over something, I think.
Okay.
But our use of size of val there probably isn't actually necessary. So we construct the actual term itself, like when we're building a heap bin or a closure or whatever, the size calculations are all based on that, what we would get from those header APIs, right? So using size of val probably isn't necessary here. It might be more accurate to say, give me whatever the header says the size is. But what I think would maybe make sense to add in there is like an assert that asks for the size from the header and also does size of val and compares the results. If they're different, that may be okay as long as the size given by the header is larger. If it's the other way around and the size of val returns a larger value, that would be a bug. That would almost certainly cause some problems. So probably just add those as debug asserts and leave them in there.
Since the term.arity is no longer like how wide something is the way it is on Beam, is it still a useful function? Or is it just useful for pulling out the arity that's in code in the header? Like, is it, because I'm just wondering if this is a safety issue now that old code is using it the wrong way.
No, like that arity function is still used on the raw term, but it's used by the header logic. So
okay.
It's mostly used to just access the unmasked value. It's not there. I should probably just rename it to something, but because I don't think there's any way for us to really hide that function in a meaningful way. This stuff is not really able to be encapsulated that way, but we don't have to call it arity. We can just call it like raw arity or something like that. The point is, it's just like the raw unmasked value. It means nothing to anybody else except for essentially the header code.
Okay.
Or things that are privileged enough to know what that means.
So hopefully this use of arity is just a printer bug for now, and I'll see if anything else is using it in a weird place that it's not supposed to anymore. Since it's more like what we would think of the arity is like how many things are in you, as opposed to like you take up this many words.
Yeah, the arity val is sort of a weird thing, even in the Beam. You know, it's it seems a little bit bizarre to sort of like give the size of something discounting the header portion of it. But you know, we inherited that a little bit and just kind of went with it. And it's useful when you're constantly saying like, I want to know how much extra stuff I have here. But I think it probably leads to more bugs than not. And probably the case was with the Beam, just as it is for us, that they iterated a bunch, fixing a whole bunch of random memory issues like this until they got it right. And then they left it dialed in. And now we're dealing with the same problem. But,
okay. When the semi-space flips, do we leave the move markers, or are they cleaned up at the very end so there are no move markers left over?
what are you talking about?
When you write, when you do the sweep, you write move markers, right?
Yes, to the old.
Do you go back and zero out the move markers once you're done, or are they left in place?
They're left in place, but they're dead, right? So the move markers are there for things. The move markers are solely there for the duration of the GC. Once the GC is done, for a minor collection, the young heap is preserved. Nothing happens to those values. Actually, scratch that. Everything on the young heap that's still live is moved to the old. A new young heap is created. For a full collection, you know, a new young heap is created. Everything from the young and the old, like everything from the young generation that would be promoted to the old, is just moved to the new heap. The old generations moved to the new heap, and both the young and old are dropped. So it's not really accurate to say that a flip happens, because it's not really a flip.
Oh, okay.
We're not reusing the heaps.
So it is a sign of a bug if I see a none on a young heap in the use space.
For a minor collection, if you see a none, I would consider that to be yes, a bug because, well, hold on a second. Let me just make sure I'm thinking about that correctly. In a minor sweep, we promote everything to the old and we have a new young heap. So yeah, if you have a none on the young heap, that would be weird. I'm not even sure how that would happen. There shouldn't be any data on the young heap after a minor collection.
Okay.
Is that true? That's not true for a minor collection. Well, the minor we save, I think, both the young and the old. The whole point is that we don't get rid of everything. We're just promoting to the old generation so that we have that generational separation.
So are we zeroing out the things that we're moving, and that's why none looks like it happens?
I'm double checking right now, so
Okay.
I want to make sure. So in the collector, yeah, this is
Hey, I need to run.
okay. Yeah, we're basically
That's
just
fine. We're
going
debugging.
with
It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
gonna stop recording now too.
I was gonna suggest BJ should probably drop too. I'm gonna head off as well.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Talk to you later.
Let's see it.
Bye.
Thanks all.
So the